who's joined so far. We're still getting people trickling in. We had a few dozen people who registered for this webinar, so thank you for joining us. This is our first one that we are doing as we're working on our new normal and trying to figure out ways to engage with people who care about the future of New Mexico and what we are doing in Viante's terms to improve that, along with everybody else and with our membership. So let me double check where we're at in terms of attendees. I think we're still getting people trickling in. That is great. I am going to get started in the essence of time. So let's get going. All right, so here we are. Here's Viante, New Mexico. Today, we're going to talk about how a lot of New Mexicans want to see a better, brighter future for everyone moving forward in the state, where we are on many of the wrong ends of lists nationally. And that's something that we know that we can change, but it's really going to take all of us joining together to be that change that we want to see. And so that's what we're about here at Viante. Now, who am I? My name is Rhiannon Samuel. I am the Executive Director of Viante, New Mexico. I have been on board since December of 2017, following a career in municipal government. And I was so drawn to this work, started by Dale Armstrong, who I will mention a little bit later, because I had always found myself within the political sphere not believing that I fell within the one-party system. I was either, I believed in certain things of one party or the other, but there was never an avenue for me to get information that I could trust, and I knew was somewhere in the middle that was balanced, focusing on what was the common good or common ground solutions. And so that's really where my heart is at in this work. And I have along with me Anna Mallory. She is our community outreach manager. She's been on board for almost a year now, and she really helps lift the heavy load with me to reach across the state with our message, letting people know that there are solutions on the table for us to move New Mexico forward, but it's really going to take people who are not engaged right now to engage with the system and be a part of the solution. So what can you expect today? Today's presentation, we're going to look at first a brief overview of Viante, very short video I want to show you. That way you can understand why we even have a voice in this, why we are talking about the structure of our legislative body, their history, and the way the process is supposed to work, which goes right into the structure of the New Mexico legislative body. New Mexico is really unique. And it's something that I am finding that in every presentation I have, every conversation, there's little nuggets in there about how special New Mexico is that folks who are even politically engaged and perhaps are going up to the roundhouse didn't even know. So this is information that I believe, and all of us at Viante believe, that everyone should have, because this is information that's going to help you make better choices for you and your family and learn how to engage more with the process. We are also going to look at why should this matter to you. It's a very big election year. We have 112 legislators on the ballot right now, coming up in November, and that's huge. And those are people who are making decisions every day on behalf of you and your families on how much teachers should get paid, which roads should be repaired, how are we going to handle crime. And so that's where I'm really going to hit on why you should pay attention to what's happening. Then how Viante fits into this picture. How do we make this information more digestible and understandable for you, knowing that you guys have busy lives, you have jobs, you have families, you have your own hobbies, and to pay attention to what's happening every single day is challenging. And so that's where we are going to talk about how we can help you. And then finally, what is the best way that you can engage with our legislature to find a way forward for New Mexico? So let's get started. All right. So here's a brief video of Viante. Please watch it and see. It's about 2 minutes long, helps really give you an idea of why we're in the mix.
We take pride in New Mexico's boundless blue skies, year-round sun, and our amazing weather. We take pride in our red and green. We take pride in our diverse culture, rich history, and traditions. New Mexico is a place that you can take your family fly fishing one day and explore the mountains the next. New Mexicans are durable, resilient, innovative, and driven. It's in our nature. So why is it that we're last in education and that we have one of the highest poverty and crime rates in the country? Why haven't we been able to climb out of this social and economic hole that overshadows all the good in our state? We can do better. We're all on the same team, and it's time we unite to be the change we want to see. We can find common ground and balance solutions that every New Mexican can be proud of. Let's demand more from ourselves and from those who represent us. It's our responsibility to hold those in public office accountable for the decisions they make. Let's make sure that they are leading the state in the right direction. Democracy only works if you stand up, use your voice, and fight for the common good of our families. Viante, New Mexico will empower you to be an educated voter who can confidently make decisions about which legislators enhance or erode common ground issues. Together, we'll improve our quality of life, education system, and reduce crime. And we are determined to be one of the most desirable places to live, work, and play. Viante will present you with non-biased, nonpartisan, transparent information so you can be confident you are getting the truth about how we can change our state for the better. Viante will be funded by you, for you. Only individuals can join, ensuring special interests have no influence. It all starts with you. You have the power to transform New Mexico. It's time for the tide to change in our state and for every New Mexican to be a part of the change. It's time to rise to the challenge. Together, we'll find the way forward.
I just love that video. This is something that we have had put together since the very inception of our work at Viante. So we have, as I had mentioned, I've been on board since December of 17, and between then and August of 18, we were building our foundation of what we stood for, how we wanted to provide a service to New Mexicans, and within what vehicle we would do that. So that has not changed at all, and it makes me really happy to see that all the ground that we have gained since then. But let's move on to our legislative presentation about the structure of New Mexico's, of our legislative body. So this picture right here, this is the New Mexico Capitol building in Santa Fe, more commonly referred to as the Roundhouse. This building was built in, and it was dedicated in 1966, and it was remodeled in 1991. And so New Mexico boasts one of the newest Capitol buildings in the entire country. But another fun fact that we have is that we also boast one of the oldest Capitol buildings that's still in use, which is the Palace of the Governors. You can see that in Santa Fe Plaza, where they keep the New Mexico History Museum. They have a lot of retablos and bultos and different things from our history in that building still being used, and that was built in 1610. So New Mexico's on both ends of that spectrum. We have both the oldest Capitol building and the newest, with this beautiful roundhouse that I get to spend every legislative session in, where everybody connects. The fact that it's a round building is neat for a few reasons. One, I tell any visitors that come with me, you really can never get lost. If you think you pass a room, just keep walking in a circle, you'll get to where you need to be. Secondly, it mirrors our Zia symbol that's on our flag. And if you look at it from the top, they have roads coming out from it too, so you get those lines. What I also love about this building is that it's a mixing bowl, truly, because you can't help but run into everyone, whether it be lobbyists, legislators, the governor herself, her office is on the top floor. Everybody is right there in the mix. So Really, really neat building. I really encourage everybody to visit it, even if it's not during the legislative session, because it can get a little crazy. There's quite a bit of folks up there, but it's just beautiful. And I'm hopeful that any New Mexican that sees it can get the same level of pride that I feel when I'm there. It also boasts a really beautiful art collection, some world-class art that people admire and come from across the country to look at, are owned by you and me, the citizens of New Mexico, and they are housed right here in the Roundhouse. Now, the legislative session, so when this building is really booming, is during that session where we have either a 30-day or a 60-day session. It's a good rule of thumb that on odd number of years, it's the 60-day session. Those are times where all of our legislators from across the state come together and they can bring up any legislation they want. It doesn't matter if it pertains to the budget, to roads, to perhaps even something social like banning plastic. All of those topics are on the table during a 60-day session on odd number years. Now, it being 2020, we just ended a 30-day session back in February. These sessions are supposed to be limited to budget conversations. The governor can also issue what are called executive messages that allow for other topics to be brought up. On the news media, they'll normally call those messages the call. And that just means that the governor said, legislators, if you introduce anything on these pre-approved topics by me, you can bring them forth and work them through the committee system. Sometimes those seem quite on the mark where it pertains to our budget. Other times they might be out of left field. It's really at any governor's discretion on what he or she wants to put on that more commonly referred to the call. This session was really unique where we had, the call was quite narrow, although there were some things like recreational marijuana and some education bills. Historically speaking, this governor tried to keep the legislators on task with the budget. Now I want to talk about why we have these two different timeframes. So it used to be that we only had one session every 2 years, and it lasted 2 months, and the legislators had to do everything within those 2 months, and then they would have an off year. But what they found it was about 1940, 1950, is that they were continuously called back, the legislators that is, to fine-tune the budget. New Mexico has a great reliance on our oil and gas industry, and so sometimes that proves to be volatile. Moreover, we have the agricultural industry it relies on the weather. So the fact that they would have to come back and retune the budget makes a lot of sense. So there was a constitutional amendment that then allowed for those off years to have those 30-day sessions that were limited to the budget, because they didn't want to continuously call people back for what's called a special session. So ever since then, we have a legislative session every year. The topics range. Now, who are the folks that are up there? We have 112 New Mexico legislators. They come from across the state, and the districts that they represent are contingent on the census. So, quick plug, if you haven't filled out your census, please go online and do it. I did it for my household and it took me all of 6 minutes. But this is really important because it talks about representation for our families and our communities. And we want to ensure that we have enough legislators up there to make sure all of our voices are adequately represented up during the session. So please fill out your census. We have 70 representatives. And then 42 senators. So naturally, like with the federal government, we have less senators than we do representatives. Representatives are unique in that their terms are less. They must be 21 years or older, and they serve 2-year terms. For senators, they must be 25 years old, and they serve 4-year terms. I like putting up the ages because I have talked to many college students and seniors in high school who feel like this process is so intangible for them, that it's so far along. There's only a lot of older, typically what I've heard from them, males, who are in those seats, that they could never get to that level. But that's not right. We have, if you're 21 years old, you can join. There's no other prerequisites other than being a New Mexico citizen within the district you're trying to represent. Similarly with the senators, 25 years old. So that's really fascinating to me, and I hope that encourages more people to see themselves in these seats that's in this picture behind. Now, the terms. The purpose in having a 2-year term or a shorter term is that those folks are more responsive to everyday needs of their community, and they can bring up any idea that comes from their constituents. They're also relying on their constituents, making their constituents happy, so that way they get reelected every 2 years. So that makes sure that they're the most representative that they possibly can be. Senators have that same standard, of course. However, in being that they have 4-year terms, that allows for more continuity. That means that although you may have a fresh new representative come in, they are very excited about what they want to do, the senators can come in and say, look, we've tried that, we did it 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and here were the challenges that it posed. So those are the balance of powers there up in Santa Fe. You'll also find that there are no term limits in New Mexico. So we have folks who have been in there for several terms, senators who've been there for, gosh, more than 20 years or so, who can provide that, that experience and that sage wisdom from the years of experience that they have to all the other legislators. Certainly, there's been debates on whether or not folks need to have term limits to make sure that there's turnover and fresh ideas coming in all the time. Other arguments against that is we need people who really understand the historical level of what has gone right and what has gone wrong, and programs that really just need time to work. So you may not see changes overnight, and some reactionary politicians might say, let's scrap it, it's done. While others say it needs more time to work its way into the system, be practiced by everyone. So another fascinating point about New Mexico, we are a citizen legislature. Now, there's only a handful of those across the country, and what does that mean? That means that our 112 legislators do not get paid. They do get a per diem, and it ranges. It goes anywhere from about $160 a day to $184, and that is meant to cover lodging, food, various expenses that it would take to participate in a committee meeting or the legislative session. They also get gas reimbursement. There are arguments that we are the lowest paid state for our legislators across the board. I would contend with that argument, though there's also New Hampshire. They do not get a per diem, but they do get $200 a year. So if you work out the math, if we get about $200 a day, we've seen some legislators make upwards of $30,000 on that per diem. That per diem is also accounted for during off times of the session, and that's what's called the interim, where they have committees and they discuss issues more in depth. So that way, when they come back into session, they can have something already that's been discussed, vetted, worked out, and then now vote on it. So New Mexico, being a citizen legislature, is something that comes up often. It's also called a volunteer legislature, lots of different names. Now, why was that even brought into the mix? Back when our Constitution was drafted in 1910, 1911, as you probably already know, we were made a state in 1912. The thought process there was to have folks that were most representative of the communities they were serving. Thus, having people who did it on a volunteer, altruistic basis would perhaps be the best suited for that, meaning that we wouldn't have what is coined as a career politician who's simply in it for the money. Now, that also poses some problems. Although very admirable, we have legislators who have to carry full-time jobs. And this, being a legislator, is a full-time job in and of itself, meaning they have to work not only during that session, but those interim times. And they're meeting with constituents all the time. They're engaging with their districts, really diving deep into the issues there. So a lot of legislators have told me that they spend more time on their legislative position than they do on their real-time jobs. So that is certainly something that many people should know about. And I'm hopeful that you can make up your own opinions. Do you think New Mexico should have a citizen legislature, or should we pay them? The state who does the most would be California. I couldn't tell you how many legislators they have at the state level, but I can tell you they make over 6 figures and they have a staff. So polar opposites, that's the beauty of having a state system where we can each do what we want to and what we feel is best. But I would really encourage you to think about, what do you think is needed for New Mexico to move us forward? Is the system in place now great, or should we try something new? Let me know. Moving on from this 112 legislators in the 2 different chambers, what does the leadership look like? Right here on the left-hand side of your screen, I hope it's still the left, the House side, we have Speaker of the House, Brian Egoff. It is said that this position holds the most power in the legislature. This position gets to dictate which committees each of the legislators has to be on. They also are the one who's responsible in that chamber for saying what is germane during that 30-day session. So there may be an executive order from the governor, but this position would say, I believe this bill relates to that message in these ways and can move forward in the process, or conversely say, I don't believe it is relevant at all, or it doesn't have an impact on the budget, so we're just going to let it die. We also have the majority and minority parties. Right now in New Mexico, we have a Democrat majority in both the House and Senate. So in the majority, Democrat Cheryl Williams Stapleton from Albuquerque, she's an educator. She's been there for a few terms now. She is the floor leader. If you go up to the session, you'll hear during the floor session a lot of different call outs between her position and the Speaker of the House, keeping things in order, keeping things a part of a procedure. It's not Robert's Rules of Order. Forgive me, I can't remember the rules that we abide by, but it's something that many states do, and she's the one that keeps them on track there. Below her, you will see Doreen Gallegos, the majority whip. Their responsibility is to ensure that their political party is in line with what they want. If they are cutting deals, or they want to see one of their fellow caucus members or colleagues get a bill across and then not another one, she's the one that's supposed to say, act this way, act that way, and keeping track of everyone, essentially. Similarly, we have the minority floor leader and the minority whip. The minority floor leader, as opposed to the majority floor leader, they don't necessarily do as many call outs to make things are in order, but they still are in charge of their party. And of course, we have the whip, who makes sure everyone is towing the line. In addition to this, although it's not really a formal rule or a formal position, you have a caucus chair in that chamber. So we have a Democrat caucus chair and the Republican, and they also have discussions amongst their party members to figure out what they want to do during the session, the kind of moves they want to make, or different deals they want to cut. That's what's happening there. Now let's move on to the Senate. This one doesn't have a single seat that is as powerful as perhaps the House. We have the President Pro Tem, who sits on the Senate Committees Committee, along with all these other folks that you see here. They're majority, minority leaders, and whips. I just got a question. Okay, great question. Okay, I'm gonna answer that question a little bit, but let me move on with Senate real quick. So The Senate, or the Senate Pro Tem, this is somebody who's typically a senior member, has somewhat of a tenure there, and they step in when the lieutenant governor isn't able to preside over their floor meeting or their floor session. Our lieutenant governor right now is Howie Morales, and what I had seen during the session was he was there pretty much every day. But in the event that he couldn't be, this is where Mary Kay Papin would step in and would be able to tell folks that, or like keep things on track and get things moving. This Senate Committees Committee, it's a funny name, of these 5 folks are the ones that determine which committees senators will be a part of, and they're the ones who will give committee assignments for different bills or deem them germane to a 30-day session. So this one has a little bit more of a consensus building here. Back to my previous slide when I talked about the differences between the House and the Senate is more, I want to say equalized, but it's more spread out, the power, and they have more of a say in the direction of things. Whereas in the House, you have a single position that certainly takes into account other people's opinions, but ultimately they hold a lot of power. Now, I got a question in, how is the House and Senate leadership elected or chosen? So this happens at the beginning of the session where they have a vote on the floor and they say who they're going to elect. There could be an opportunity where, let's say the Democrats have the majority, but they really favor a Republican, and it's somebody that gets along with both sides. They certainly could be in that speaker position, but historically speaking, we have not seen that yet. Although here at Viante, we would love to see some bipartisan effort like that show up. Similarly, on the Senate side, they make different elections and they have different votes in the first couple days of the session to ensure these positions are filled, and that way everything can go smoothly for the next 30 to 60 days. Great question. Now, those committees I was talking about. Get my little mouse. If it will let me. There we go. All right. So how many committees do we have? Between the 2 chambers, we have 26 total standing committees. If you think about it being a 30 to 60-day session, they're working about 5 to 6 days a week. In the beginning part of the session, a lot more 7-day weeks happening at the end. These are committees that have to meet regularly. If you're in a committee like, let's say, education, that one has a typical schedule of meeting Monday, Wednesday, Friday at a predetermined time by the committee chair and the committee members. It's either at 8 or 8:30, or if you're on the water committee, that may just meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays during the session. Now, what do they look like? There's 17 House committees and 9 Senate committees. I have heard a criticism of how many committees there are, particularly in the House, where they have many. They have, in fact, 2 enrolling and engrossing committees that are responsible for, once a bill makes it through both chambers, which I'll discuss the process here in a little bit, they do all the odds and ends there. But their committees range anywhere from appropriations and finance, very big committee, to something perhaps not as big like local government, land grants, and cultural affairs. So they tend to have more topic-specific committees as opposed to the Senate. I can in fact read all of the Senate ones without boring you too much. It's the Conservation Committee, the Corporations and Transportation, Education, Finance, Indian and Cultural Affairs, Judiciary, Public Affairs, Rules, and then the one I was referencing before, the Senate Committees Committee. Now, why is it important that we have this many committees as opposed to like keeping it to education, crime, and quality of life? Well, it's because when a bill is assigned a committee, it goes through a few. And it may even go through a committee that really isn't relevant to the topic at hand, but it's meant to vet it in a way that makes it as thoughtful as possible, where many eyes are there on it before it makes it all the way to the floor. So lots of committees. While up in Santa Fe during the session, you have a fair share to choose from just based off of your interest, but perhaps even the interest of bills you're wanting to track. So fascinating thing there. And another point, if you have a legislator who, let's say their day profession is a lawyer and they would like to be on the Judiciary Committee, they are not guaranteed a seat there. In fact, they may be placed on something like the Health and Human Services Committee, where they really don't have any expertise, but they're still asked to provide an opinion on it. And that's at the discretion of, on the House side, the Speaker of the House, and on the Senate, that committee's committee to make the determination. The legislators, each one have a voice, and they can lobby for the committees they want to be a part of, but at the end of the day, the power or the it's not really in their it's not really within their power to say, I'm going to be a part of this one. They're assigned it. So, and sometimes those larger ticket item committees like education or judiciary, it's going to be sometime you have to put in some tenure in order to get there. Now, who's supporting these committees and these legislators? We have different entities. We have 4 different entities between the Legislative Council Service, Legislative Building Services, Legislative Education Study Committee, and the Legislative Finance Committee. All of those groups are responsible for helping to vet bills for different legislators, draft bills throughout the interim, and then on the building side, they make sure that everything is going to go smoothly while in session, the grounds are kept, and it's a place that can be open to the public. So although the legislators may not have full-time paid staff, they certainly do have resources available to them, even if they're not as robust as perhaps their own staff. What are we looking at in terms of what goes through the process? We have bills, resolutions, and memorials. I'm going to start at the end with memorials. These are pieces of legislation that are introduced that are more of a signifier for different topics. You'll have Boy Scouts of America Day, or they'll even name some task forces in these bills saying that they want to look at like opioid deaths in New Mexico, and they will be put in the form of a memorial. A challenge with a memorial is it's not exactly legally binding like a bill. It's more of a signifier of significance to the legislators. So there's lots of memorials that happen during the session. Perhaps sometimes they may outweigh the bills and the time that legislators speak to them. So that makes me as a person watching the process a little bit frustrated, because I want to get to the nitty-gritty. I want to see the bills that are going to be enacted and are going to change the state of things. Memorials, I understand their significance, may not be up to that caliber. Now, bills. Those are things that go into law. They either amend a law, they introduce a new law, or they repeal certain things. These typically take a little bit more time and attention from our legislators. Those are the things that Viante looks at. Now, finally, resolutions. These are what you may call a little bit more serious, where you have to get approval from the voters. So it would show up in the next ballot, where it would actually change our Constitution. So going back to the fact that we're a citizen legislature, let's say as a state, we think we really need to change that and have a paid legislature. That needs to be introduced in the form of a resolution in order to get anywhere. And then it needs to be voted on by us, the voters. If we hearken back to the example of the citizen legislature, it's tricky because we would be having legislators vote on something that may be perceived as them giving themselves a pay raise. So these resolutions tend to carry a lot more weight, a lot more consequences, and then ultimately they leave it up to the voters of New Mexico to make the final decision. Things like going into our permit funds, whether it be the land grant permanent fund, those have to be in the form of a resolution too. So I would say in terms of going from lightest to heaviest, or like in the consequence way, memorials are the lightest, resolutions carry a lot more weight. So when a bill gets introduced, it goes through the entire process like normal, where it has sponsors, co-sponsors, a committee assignment. If it is assigned more than 3 committees, people who generally go up to Santa Fe understand that it's pretty much dead on arrival. To make it through so many committees in just a single chamber takes a very long time. So that's something that we like to look out for, because it kind of gauges the appetite of the legislature for any idea, especially during a 60-day session where everything is on the table. Seeing how many committees and which committees it's assigned is a sign of where or how far it will go. Then it will go through the process on each house, go for a House floor vote or a Senate floor vote, and then cross into the other chamber where it starts everything over again with committee assignments and then a floor vote. If there were any significant changes on either chamber side, then it would have to be confirmed or ratified in the chamber it was introduced, then sent on up to the governor's desk. Naturally, if any legislation has a request for an appropriation, it will go through the Finance Committee, where they really vet those bills to see if we have the money or if it's in the prioritization list of either the legislature or the executive. Then, once it makes it through this floor vote in each chamber, it goes to the governor's office. And forgive me for such a blurry picture. I need to take a new one. And the governor has a few options with this bill. She could veto it, just outright. She needs to provide an explanation for it. We've seen some litigation in the past with previous governors who did not provide an explanation for their veto, and then her veto was overruled by the courts. So they have to provide that. Or she could do, or he or she, depending on the executive, can do what is called a pocket veto. So after the session, they have X number of days to make a determination on if they're going to sign it or just going to veto it. But if they don't take any action, then it's pocket vetoed without an explanation for the legislative body as to why that happened. There's also the ability to line item veto, where they can go through an individual bill, namely it's going to be the budget bill, and cross out certain things that they don't agree with or want to fund. So those are the 3 options. And of course, as I had mentioned, so 3 options for vetoing, and then of course, there's the signing that can take place as well. Now, this is a really important piece because it's something that's come up in the media a lot. And this is where the governor's seat holds a lot of power over the legislature. So the legislature can do whatever they want, but at the end of the day, if the governor is not willing to sign it, there's an issue. And so that's why the coordination between our 2 branches of government is really important and can make or break something. This past year, here's what we saw on the number of bills that were introduced. And I'm just looking at bills, so not including those resolutions or memorials I was referencing earlier. In 2020, we had 727 bills introduced. This is pretty much on par with what we have seen in years past. But what is different this time around is there seemed to be a little bit more of an uphill battle to get it through the 2 chambers. Now you might be looking at this chart, looking at 2014 with the 787 or 85 that passed and the 88 that went through. That it was some, I mean, that's a bit more like what we saw in 2020, but that tells me, just looking at the numbers, that each body spent a little bit more time paying attention to how the impact of each of the bills and kind of slowing down the process a little bit more. Now, of that, there were 28 this past year in 2020 that were vetoed by the governor. And of that 28, 14 were pocket vetoed with no explanation. But out of all of that, we had 80 pieces of legislation that were signed this year and are being enacted as we speak, pretty much. So what is Viante's role in all of this. So that's a lot of information, and I didn't even get into everything. I try and hold back sometimes. I've been told by Anna and Dale and others that I tend to geek out when it comes to New Mexico history or the way our process works. So at the end, well, I'll have a Q&A. So if I didn't touch on something, I'd be happy to. But Viante's role in this is we're trying to find a way forward for New Mexico. Viante is a made-up word rooted in the Latin phrase via ante, which means way forward, because we believe that if all New Mexicans can bind together and understand what's happening and have this base layer of education around the system, we'll see a brighter future for all of us, because we are more centered on finding common ground solutions that we can all get behind. Because at the end of the day, I can't tell you a single New Mexican who doesn't want a brighter future for New Mexico. We have children growing up here every day who are subjected to an education system that isn't preparing them for college or career, where we have 1 in 3 of our 4th graders not able to read on grade level. These are things that no one wants. And yet we are continuously showing up on the wrong end of a lot of national lists. So if we can better understand the players, the rules that they abide by, certainly we can engage with it better, each one of us individually and collectively, to be that change that we want to see. This year is especially important too, because as I had mentioned, this is a huge election year with all 112 legislators on the ballot, but not all are facing opposition. So to harken back to this data, we have 112 legislators, 70 representatives, 42 senators, and in our 2020 election, we have 51 House seats contested out of that 70. So folks that are in their own community seeing somebody who thinks that they have a better way to do things than what had been done before. We are also seeing 35 Senate seats contested. Now, when you combine those and you take a percentage, there is 77% of our legislative body that could change hands this November. If every one of those seats is decided by the voters that they do not want to have that person there anymore, that it means we could have a massive shift in the folks who are representing us and are proposing solutions. So these are really important numbers. These are the folks who determine how much our teachers get paid, if our roads get repaired, and our criminal justice system. These are people who will make decisions during this 30 or 60 days that you will see almost immediately. In fact, right now we have legislators grappling with the need to have a special session. We have a big issue with COVID-19, families facing economic hardship, while also seeing a decline in our major money producer for our state, which is oil and gas. So the folks who are seated right now are going to make those decisions on how we're going to move forward as a state. It's not a singular person with a governor, a president, etc. It's a collective group of people who have to come to a consensus that executive can sign off on. And certainly the executive has a great deal of sway with those folks, but they do not have the final say. So let's see, how many seats are opposed? This was a question posed by Kayla. I have the numbers here. I'll send that data out in a little bit. Kind of gets into the gritty of it, nitty gritty of it. Essentially, we're looking at, oh goodness, let me get it back to you. I don't want to get too far on my notes, but I'll get you that answer here shortly. So what Viante first looks at in all of this information is, are our legislators who are currently there showing up for the job? In my conversations with former legislators, lobbyists alike, is that many weren't showing up. And that was a challenge because They have to meet quorum standards. They want to make sure that they have adequate representation from across the state. So we wanted to look at some information around that was as fair as possible. So we just look at their floor votes. This past year, we had 8 legislators who had perfect attendance, which is really remarkable. We also had 4 out of our 112 legislators that missed more than 20% of their votes. And that can be for a variety of reasons. Here at Viante, we're not trying to cast judgment on whether or not those reasons are valid. They range anywhere from having to be at home for a family commitment, meeting with lobbyists during the time that they're supposed to be taking a floor vote, or working out the details of their own bill. That information or those reasons are up to their constituents to determine on whether or not it was acceptable. For us at Viante, we just are trying to provide a window of transparency into whether or not they were there. And we are the only organization doing that. I also have some breakdowns here by chamber and by party. So all in all, 93% there, floor votes, that's remarkable. I'd like to mention an example from 2018 where it was a 60-day session and we did a midway check-in with legislators, and one had been gone nearly 50% of the time in that first 30 days just for floor votes. Let the news media know, let leadership know, and that legislator had a variety of reasons, but I'm really happy to say that in the following final part of 30 days of that session, that legislator did not miss another vote and bumped that 50% score up all the way to 86, just because we were watching. So little wins happening in a short amount of time. Now, what else is Viante looking at? We're looking at all the bills that are introduced in education, crime, and quality of life. We're keeping an eye out for things that are common ground, because certainly there are topics that come up year after year, whether it be climate change, gun control, abortion. Many people have very firm beliefs in those issues. But what's left to die are common ground solutions in each of these areas that touch our lives. And when they're taking so much time talking about a really controversial issue that they're never going to reach agreement on, we're left to deal with the impacts of our education system not working for our kids, or our quality of life slipping and job opportunities not being there. So we're asking for legislators to look for those common ground solutions. You can talk about those hot topic issues if you want, that's fine, but please spend some time on these issues that matter to all of us, regardless of party. Now, I want to give an example within crime, a bill that we have focused on for 2 years in a row now, in 2019 and 2020. Within crime, it's called the crime of illegally dismantling stolen vehicles. And this is something that holds chop shop owners liable for knowingly purchasing stolen vehicles. New Mexico is #1 in the country for stolen vehicles, and we don't have this law in the books. Other states do. And this is something that died. It passed through one chamber unanimously. The other chamber couldn't find the time for it. These are things that would make a difference for each one of us when we wake up in the morning wondering if our vehicle is still there. And yet our legislators weren't able to vote on it. So those are the kind of solutions that we're looking for, that we're wanting to share with others so they can better understand how our lawmakers are performing on our behalf. Our scorecard is nonpartisan. It does not focus on party, on gender, on chamber, anything. And I'm not putting these folks up here to demonize them whatsoever. I completely have respect for all of these folks who choose to serve. But what I'm trying to show here is that we are the first scorecard that does not filter by anything other than, are they showing up for the job and are they working together? So you'll see Republicans and Democrats throughout, all very hardworking. But what we're trying to say with Viante, with those people who are scoring perhaps a little bit lower than others, is please become more well acquainted with the common ground solutions coming out of your community that are going to make lives better for all of us in New Mexico. Not just one party, not just one industry, but all of us. Now, our scorecard this year in 2020 is going to come out in a couple of weeks. We have been working very hard during our social distancing from home to comb through all of the bills to find just 15 bills, 5 within education, crime, and quality of life, that we can bring to light for folks that were common ground solutions in New Mexico. And for the attendance, which I have already shared with you, that's something we can release right after this session. But the bill selection takes a little bit longer because we want to be as thoughtful as possible in doing it. That's what's coming up. I have been talking a lot longer than I thought I would. So the last portion presentation is really the origin of Viante, and it really all starts with this amazing New Mexican, Dale Armstrong, who made the commitment that he loves New Mexico and he really just doesn't want to leave. I'm going to quickly show you this short video from him, and then I'm going to just blaze on through a little bit of the end of my slide deck so we have some time for questions. But here is Dale.
Hi, I'm Dale Armstrong, 4th generation New Mexican. I grew up here, went to school here, raised my family here, started my business here. 2 years ago, my wife became a state representative. I would spend time driving to Santa Fe after work and watching how the legislative body worked. And I became very discouraged. There's 112 legislators. There's all kinds of laws that are being changed and added, and I was so discouraged.
Sorry.
That we're at the bottom of every list. I thought, you know what, I'm going to sell all my stuff, move to Texas or Arizona where they kind of have everything lined up and things are very prosperous. Then I decided, you know what, I love New Mexico. I've got 9 grandkids. I've got all my kids here. I'm going to put some energy into seeing how we could get the people involved, the working people of New Mexico, and move this state in the right direction. I've spent the last year and a half visiting with people around the state. I found there's a great appetite for people on a grassroots platform to focus on common ground issues, not the things that divide New Mexico, but the things that unite New Mexico. With all this positive feedback, I formed Viante. Viante is the way forward for New Mexico, helping to make it one of the best places to live, work, and play. Join Viante today, doing your part to help move New Mexico forward. Hi, I'm Dale Armstrong.
Next. I think Dale's story is something that can resonate with all of us. I certainly have friends from high school and college who really wanted to move away really quickly because of our high crime rates, or not knowing that if they choose to start to have a family here, if their kids are going to have the opportunities that they need to succeed. And so I really appreciate what Dale has done in that we all have the ability to turn things around. And it's not just going to be us complaining about the issues that are going to make the difference. It's going to be us engaging with this process and letting folks, namely our electeds, know what is going to work for us in making New Mexico better. So, and it's really about turning the state around for our kids. So Viante may not be exactly for you, and that's okay. There are several other organizations out there that do spectacular work. They may be a little bit more left-leaning or right-leaning, or be issue-based, whether it be the free economy or animal protection. But what we're trying to do here at Viante is provide a voice and a portal of information like today where anybody can feel welcome. They don't feel like they're going to try and be convinced of something, or they don't feel like they're trying to be fed certain talking points. We're just trying to give people the unadulterated truth of what's happening and the way it should work. Because at the end of the day, when New Mexico is on the wrong end of so many lists, quite frankly, doing nothing is no longer an option. And if Viante's for you, you want to become a member, fabulous. We welcome it. But if you want to go somewhere else or you want to run for office, all the more power to you. But us not engaging is what has gotten us to this point now. So I really, really hope that you'll share something that you learned here today with your friends or family, or you feel compelled to join us in our mission of reaching out to across the state and sharing this information. And that looks it looks different throughout the year. This is a great slide around our ballot party. We'll go to your place of employment. We'll walk people through their ballots of not just how to register to vote, making sure you are, but also to look at your ballot and why you have a voice on certain things. There is a lot on there that people had never really considered, like the fact that we have GO bonds. Folks had told me this past year they didn't even know what they were or why they had a say. I'm not telling you who to vote for. Again, I want to make that so clear. I'm just trying to arm you with more information so you can be a more educated voter. And in those ballot parties, again, we'll help you register to vote, help with your individual ballot information, make a plan to vote. That is a very important one. I can speak from experience that I had every intention of voting early, and then it comes time for the actual election day, and I'm like, oh shoot, I gotta find a place and go. So we'll make that plan together. We also host events where we bring together different legislators and talk to them about, hey, there is a lot more we can agree on than we disagree. These two gentlemen in the center of your screen, on the left is Speaker Townsend. He's a Republican, and he comes from oil and gas land. He was also an exec in one of those companies. And then we have Senator Michael Padilla. He is a Democrat from the South Valley who grew up in foster homes. In this panel discussion that you see in the top left part of your screen, we brought them together on issues that really cut across that political divide that we hear so often, both in the media and sometimes when you go up into Santa Fe. And it was so nice to see that they knew and they walked away with a greater appreciation for more similarities than differences. And we're hopeful that they can carry that forward when they're in session. And that's what we're trying to harbor with all of this. Those people meeting, but also all those people, like in your upper right-hand corner, coming, learning, and telling those elected leaders, this is what we want to see. Get down here. So just a brief plug, I know this is not the easiest time for a lot of folks economically, but if you find that you're able to support us, here's our two levels at $10 a month or $65 a month. We'd greatly appreciate your support. But again, we are very sensitive to the fact that it's a tough time for pretty much all of America. So we're going to continue doing what we do, but any support along the way would be really helpful. So that is the presentation. I will take I'll take the next 5 minutes or so. If anybody wants to type your question in the Q&A, I've answered 2 questions so far, which was how the House and Senate leadership is elected or chosen and how many seats are unopposed. I also got a little comment about my necklace, which I think is blinding you at some point, so I apologize. But anything else, I'm here, or if you think about it later, let me know. Send us an email at info@viante, V-I-A-N-T-E, and m.org. And if I don't know the answer right away, I am more than happy to look for it. So with that, I will do the little Jeopardy pause for any questions. All right, well, with that, thank you so much for your time today, spending a little bit of your quarantine time with Viante, learning something new. Again, if you found value in this, please share something that you learned with a friend or a family member, because in my experience, people want to know. And that is just, that is, the more that we can share information, the better. I just did get a text from a participant. It was I'm not sure who answered this, but I appreciate you. It's the House follows the Mason Rules of Order. Thank you. I'm much more familiar with Robert's Rules of Order with all the boards that I help serve on. So Mason's is a little bit more strict and much more parliamentarian. But with that, thank you so much. Follow up with us and like us on Facebook, Instagram. You'll find all the latest that we do there. And a good thank you, or a big thank you to Anna to help make this happen. Ooh, I actually did get one question in. Stand by. It says, for the chop shop bill, for one chamber to pass it unanimously and the other chamber not to vote, who made that decision? Committee, chair, or whip? In this instance, so what happened was it passed through the House unanimously, went over to the Senate. And the Senate Committees Committee did give it some committee assignments, but then in the first committee it was in, it did not pass it. I was in that committee when it happened, and it was Senate Judiciary. And it was the second to last day of this past session, and one of the committee members started bringing up a lot of technical concerns with it and just questioning the origin of the bill. Although it was passed even in 2019 unanimously through one chamber, and again in 2020, they still had some concerns. And with it being towards the end of the session, they said they were going to table the bill, which essentially means it's going to die unless somebody brings it back off the table for business. That doesn't really happen in committees outside of finance or tax and revenue. So in this particular case, it was the decision by that committee member to kind of drag out the system. In other instances, it could be up to the committee chair, who never puts it on the agenda to be heard. So a lot of different people can have a say in whether something lives or dies. So I hope that answered your question, Gary. But there's a lot of voices in the mix. There's a lot of ways things can go wrong. So the fact that I think I had mentioned 80 bills were signed, made it through the entire process is actually quite remarkable, given all the ways that it could go wrong. Double checking other notifications. With that, thank you all so much. I really appreciate your support and your time. I'll see you next week. Anna and I are discussing perhaps doing these weekly, so if we could get you to join in those conversations too, I would love topics. Ideas are, what's the difference between a primary and a general election? Why is there really issues between absentee or mail-in ballots? Things that require a little bit more of a conversation, perhaps not an entire hour like this one, but we can really dive into and help get you the information that you want to know. So send us an email at info@viantenm.org, and thanks again.